The scatter garden sits just beyond the west gate, a quiet slice of pine-needled earth where families come to say the softest goodbyes. River stones laid in a spiral, simple and kind, each one carrying a name, a date, or a prayer scratched by trembling hands. I've tended it for years, raking needles, trimming the edge line, keeping the spiral neat. That night, the wind was coming steady from the east, dry and clean off the front range. It carried the smell of dust and thawed earth. I'd stayed behind to tidy up after a late family visit. They'd scattered their father's ashes, said a few words, and left a small tin of marigolds on the edge of the path. After they drove off, it was just me, the rake, and the whisper of pine branches rubbing like soft bones overhead. I was halfway through when I noticed it. The spiral wasn't right. 4 stones missing, a clean gap like teeth knocked from a jaw. I don't know why that image came to me, but it did. And it wouldn't leave. I knelt down, brushed aside a handful of needles, and started setting the stones back in place. That's when the wind stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Everything just folded in on itself. No rustle from the pines, no hum from the highway. Even the insects went still, like the whole garden had been sealed inside a jar. The silence pressed down on me. I could hear my breath, rough and too loud, and the soft scrape of granite sliding against soil. Then, from behind me, a woman's voice said, "Clear, close, and steady." That isn't mine. I froze. I turned, expecting one of the family members had come back for something they'd forgotten, but the lane was empty. My flashlight swept over the trees, the memorial bench, the bronze plaque by the entrance. Nothing moved. And then I saw it. By my boot, half buried under needles, an envelope, swollen and damp from old snowmelt. I pulled it free. Inside was a small plastic baggie, clouded with moisture, holding a thin layer of cremains. There was a funeral home label on it, half torn away by rain. The remaining half showed a name, and it wasn't the same one as the marker I'd logged earlier that afternoon. My stomach dropped. There's a rhythm to scattering ashes, chain of custody, verification, witness log, and documentation. Every name, every ounce of dust accounted for. If something goes missing, it's not just an error, it's desecration. If I'd kept raking, if that envelope had rolled deeper into the spiral, we would have scattered someone else's remains in the wrong place. And it would have stayed wrong until someone came with a court order or a prayer unanswered long enough to notice. I sat there, staring at that torn label, trying to piece together how it ended up here. Maybe wind, maybe an accident, maybe human carelessness, the kind that happens when grief makes people move without thinking. But the voice, that's what stayed with me. It wasn't angry. It wasn't afraid. It was protective. I dialed the number on the soggy sticker, the one barely readable under the funeral home crest. The night clerk sounded groggy, half listening until I read the name aloud. Then she went silent. I heard her keyboard clicking, fast, urgent. Finally, she said, "That can't be right. That family came yesterday morning. We have their paperwork." I told her what I found. She asked me to seal the bag, log it, and wait for collection, which I did. By the book, chain of custody, signed like a cop, timestamp exact. And then I sat there on the pine needles until the wind returned. When it did, it wasn't the same. It didn't just blow. It breathed. It moved through the spiral, lifted a handful of loose needles, and circled them once before carrying them off eastward, like something satisfied. I looked at the break in the stones again. The gap had closed. Perfect spiral. No missing pieces. Sometimes, mercy doesn't come as comfort. Sometimes, it comes as objection. And that night, I learned the first and hardest rule of the scatter garden. Rule 1. Verify names and chain of custody before any scattering or placement. Labels, paperwork, witness log. If anything feels off, stop. The garden speaks once, the records speak forever. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Your city, your state, your country. We love knowing where our horror family is tuning in from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing to help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Your support truly keeps this channel alive. Now, sit back, keep your lights low, and let's continue. The office phone shouldn't ring after midnight. We forward all calls to the answering service after hours. It's a rule, both practical and superstitious. But that night, the bell rang loud and old-fashioned, the analog kind with a real hammer inside. It cut through the silence of the cemetery office like something alive. At first, I ignored it. No one calls after midnight unless there's been a death, and even then, the call goes straight to dispatch. The first ring stopped. Then came a second, then a third, harsher, like whoever was on the other end was losing patience. When I finally picked up, I didn't say my name right away. I just listened. The handset was cold, heavier than usual, and when I pressed it to my ear, I heard my name whispered. Plain, like how a mother calls you in from the yard after dark. No emotion, no urgency. Just familiarity. "Who is this?" I asked. The line breathed back. Not static, not interference. Breathing. Slow, human. Then I heard a tapping sound. 4 quick taps, a pause, then 4 more. Over and over. It took me a second to recognize it. The pattern we use on the service panel for the West Mausoleum elevator. The one we'd shut down earlier that day for electrical maintenance. I swiveled in my chair toward the office window. Out across the gravel path, the West Mausoleum sat in black silhouette, locked and silent. The power in that wing was off. No lights, no hum. Nothing. Yet through the office glass, I could see the faint red glow of the elevator call button. A single dot of light, pulsing like a dying ember. That was impossible. I took my keys, slipped my flashlight into my pocket, and walked the long way around, under the motion lights that lined the service lane. Every crunch of gravel under my boots felt like it echoed too long, like the air didn't want sound to settle. When I reached the mausoleum, the air changed. The maintenance lockout tag still hung from the breaker box, untouched. But the elevator door wasn't closed all the way. It stood open just a few inches. A slow, stale breath of air drifted out, carrying a smell that was sweet and wrong. If you've ever opened a sealed space that's been cut off from ventilation for too long, you know it. The air is heavy, clinging, almost wet. I knelt down and shined my flashlight into the gap. The beam hit the far wall of the shaft, scattered, then vanished. For half a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement, a shadow sliding out of sight. Then something clicked deep inside the shaft, like the sound of metal settling. That's when my head started to ache. Not a normal headache, more like pressure, the kind you feel when you've been holding your breath too long. My temples throbbed, and I felt dizzy, the same way you do when the air's too thick. I took a step closer. The phone in my pocket buzzed once, just once, and went dead. That was enough for me. I stepped back, closed the outer door, and threw the latch. When I looked through the narrow glass afterward, the red light was gone. The next morning, the elevator mechanic came to finish the inspection. I told him what happened, leaving out the phone part because it sounded crazy even to me. He said trapped air in sealed shafts can build up CO2, especially after chemical treatments from concrete restoration. You get too close. You can black out in seconds, he said. Feels like pressure in your head, headache, disorientation. Sometimes people drop before they even realize it. He said a lot of technical words, but what stuck with me wasn't science. It was instinct, that click in the back of my skull that told me to get out before something pulled me in. I checked the call logs later. The line that rang that night, the analog line, was disconnected 6 months earlier. It's been quiet ever since. But I never answer calls from inside the office after midnight anymore. I step outside first, under open air, where the wind can move and the dead can't whisper through the lines. Rule number 2, if the office phone rings after midnight, do not answer from inside. Step outside under open air, call back from your cell, and never, ever enter a darkened mausoleum alone. The pump house isn't much to look at. Just a cinder-block cube by the north fence, half sunk in mud and weeds, where the irrigation brains live. During the day it hums, a steady mechanical heart that keeps the lawns green and the flowers upright for visiting families. At night, it ticks and breathes in that quiet machine way, the sound that means everything's alive even when the world around it sleeps. That night, the sound changed. I was finishing my rounds, flashlight low, when I heard it. A hard, metallic bang echoing from inside the pump house, sharp enough to rattle the gate latch. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It was the distinct slap of a check valve struggling against pressure. I'd heard it once before after a cold snap, when trapped air fought to escape the line. I unlocked the door and stepped in. The air was warm, damp, and smelled faintly of rust and algae. I went straight to the panel, intending to shut down the main pump for a minute to reset the system. That's when I saw it. Condensation on the inside of the narrow window. At first, I thought it was just from the heat meeting the cold outside. But this wasn't random fog. It was breathing. A single patch of glass, about the size of a face, was fogging and clearing, slow, steady, rhythmic, as if someone was standing right outside, exhaling softly against the pane. I froze, hand still on the pump switch. The glass cleared again. I thought maybe the air was leaking through a crack or the fan was misaligned, but the fan wasn't running. The pump still groaned, but the rhythm didn't match. I killed the power. Silence filled the room. The breathing didn't stop. I backed up to the door, every instinct in me saying, "Don't look," but I did anyway. I opened the door, and the cold night hit me like a slap, dry, sharp, and bright with stars. The smell of wet soil came with it, rich and sweet, the kind that usually rises only after fresh digging. No one stood at the window, but in the gravel, right below the glass, were 2 shoe prints. Clear as truth. Toes pointed toward the wall, close together, like someone standing in prayer at a hospital bed. Between them, half buried in frost, something caught the light. I bent down and picked it up. It was a small brass key, old, worn, with a tag etched "Donation Safe." That key had been missing for months, 3 to be exact. It disappeared the same night our donation slot came up $60 higher than the ledger recorded. We searched everywhere. Nobody confessed. The matter got quiet, like things do when the explanation feels worse than the loss. But now, here it was, gleaming under the stars, right where someone, or something, had been watching. I turned off my flashlight and stood still. The pump house behind me ticked as metal cooled. The night wind whispered across the grass, moving toward the infant section. I followed the prints. They faded as they went, softer, shallower, until the last impressions disappeared into frost by the small lamb markers. Tiny headstones, barely 6 inches tall, names short, years shorter. The air there always feels thinner. I didn't linger. I went back to the office, laid the key on the desk under a notepad, and wrote a line without really thinking. If you take what is meant for care, they will collect it themselves. Then I locked up and went home. When I came in the next morning, the key was gone. The safe, which hadn't been opened in months, sat closed and spotless. Inside, on top of the ledgers, was exactly $60 in folded bills, wrapped inside a paper towel that smelled faintly of bleach, like something cleaned before being returned. No note, no fingerprints, just balance. I replaced the lock that same afternoon and had a camera installed over the donation slot. The maintenance guys joked that maybe one of the grounds crew had finally grown a conscience, but I don't believe that. When I passed the pump house later that evening, the system kicked on by itself. No timer set, no hands near the switch. The lines filled, the sprinklers hissed, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw movement by the window. Just the faintest rise and fall, like breathing. Some debts, I think, Don't stay unpaid for long. Rule 3. Money destined for care of the grounds is not yours to touch. Audit nightly, lock what belongs to the dead, and never ignore a discrepancy. The cemetery will settle its own debts. Grave tents make a little living room of grief. Green canvas stretched tight against the weather, folding chairs arranged in a half circle. Carpet laid over fresh-turned earth so families don't have to see the dirt when they say goodbye. It's a temporary kindness, one of those quiet, practical things cemeteries do to make death feel just a little more polite. We usually leave the tents up overnight if the morning service is early. Saves time for the grounds crew, keeps the equipment dry, and lets families arrive to something that already feels prepared. I've done it hundreds of times, never thought twice about it. That night, though, a snow squall came roaring off the foothills around 1 a.m., sideways and mean. The kind of wind that doesn't just move through you, it shoves. I grabbed my parka, flashlight, and gloves, and headed out to check the tents before anything tore loose. The cemetery looked different in stormlight. No color, just the hard white of snow flurries and the black cutouts of monuments. The tent stood near the east row, its canvas snapping like a flag. I ducked inside to check the center pole. It was warm enough under there to smell the damp carpet, the metal chairs creaking softly in the gusts. My flashlight beam caught the green interior walls, the fluttering drapes, and then something darker near the far chair. A pair of shoes. Polished black, salt-ringed, toes pointed toward each other like a man had fallen asleep listening to a sermon. For a second, my mind did that automatic calculation we all do out here. Could one of the grounds crew have stopped to get out of the wind? Maybe a mourner came early, left something? "Sir?" I said. No answer. The wind punched the canvas, and the center pole groaned like a tall ship in a storm. I crossed the carpet slowly, half expecting someone to stir. But the closer I got, the stranger it felt. Because the shoes didn't sit like shoes someone had stepped out of. They were placed, perfectly side by side. I lifted the edge of the carpet flap to see if someone had left them for storage. That's when the flashlight caught what was inside. No ankles, no socks, just shoes. They were filled with brown water, melt water probably mixed with clay. In the left shoe, a thin trail of bubbles rose from the toe, popped, rose again, like something was still breathing down there. A cold pulse ran through me. I pulled the carpet back, kneeling to check the ground. The soil had slumped a full inch downward under the weight of the snow. A subtle sinkhole forming where the frost heave and thaw had softened the grave's edge. Water pooled in a pocket no wider than a hat, hidden perfectly under the tent. If the wind had kept up for another hour, that corner would have collapsed. A pallbearer stepping backward during the service could have twisted an ankle into the sinking edge, maybe hit the lowering device head first. It would have been another accident on sacred ground, and those are the kind that never really leave you. I rolled up my sleeves and went to work, pulled the carpet aside, baled the shoes with a coffee cup from my pocket, tamped the edges with the flat of my shovel until my arms burned. Every gust made the poles shudder, but I wasn't leaving it until it was safe. When the water finally stopped pooling and the ground held firm, I set the shoes neatly at the tent's mouth, lined up, dry as I could make them. The storm quit just like that. No slow fade, no taper. One moment, it screamed through the canvas. The next, nothing but still air and a faint hiss of melting snow sliding down the fabric. The silence felt personal, like whatever had been breathing under there had finished its work and gone quiet once it knew I'd understood. When the sun rose a few hours later, the tent stood perfect. No sag, no sink, no trace of the puddle. The shoes were gone. Maybe one of the crew picked them up. Maybe not. But I'll tell you this, since that night, I've never walked past a tent without checking the ground twice. The earth moves out here when no one's looking, and it doesn't always wait for permission. Rule 4. Always inspect tents after wind or thaw. Check carpets for hollow ground, secure poles, and walk the perimeter before anyone sits. The earth shifts when no one's watching. The ossuary sits by the north path, a stainless steel cylinder recessed into a granite plinth. It looks simple, modern, and deliberate. Inside is where unclaimed bone meets water, ground to dust by time and kindness. It's the last place for those whose names have fallen out of the records, whose ashes no one came for, whose families never called back. We open it twice a year, always with a minister present. There's a short prayer, a reading, and then a silence that feels deeper than any grave. You learn not to think too much about what's inside, just that it's cared for. That's all the dead ask of us. But 3 nights before inspection day, I started dreaming about it. In the dream, the ossuary wasn't filled with dust. It was filled with water. The lid shimmered with condensation, and beneath that surface something looked up at me, steady, patient, waiting. I'd wake with my heart beating like I'd swallowed something alive. Each night, the dream was clearer. On the 3rd, I could see details. A woman's face under the water, hair floating, eyes open. I told myself it was stress, too many late shifts, too many names. When the real inspection came, I decided to do a routine check before the minister arrived, just to ease my nerves. The moon was high and white, sharp enough to throw silver edges along the stones. I unlocked the side panel with the maintenance key, expecting the usual dry hum of air from the vault. Everything inside was clean and ordinary. Stainless interior, desiccant packs, bone dust sealed in archival bags, not a trace of moisture. I exhaled, half laughing at myself, dreaming about the ossuary. What kind of caretaker does that make me? I told myself I was tired, set the panel down flat on the grass, and straightened up to log the check. That's when a shadow slid across my shoes. It moved quick like someone walking past, but slower, too deliberate to be a bird or a passing cloud. I looked up. The sky was perfectly clear. No clouds. The moon sat above me, bright as a coin. There was nothing up there to cast a shadow. I looked down. The panel I'd set on the grass caught the moonlight like a mirror, and in that polished reflection, I saw myself. And behind me, a woman. Her head tilted down, wet hair laid across her face like riverweed. I spun around fast enough to make my neck pop. The lawn stretched empty all the way to the columbarium wall, just the sound of a night train rolling far off. When I looked back, the reflection showed only me and the moon again, nothing else. But the grass where I'd been standing was darker now, pressed down, damp. I replaced the panel carefully, tightening every bolt until my fingers ached. Then I turned to leave and felt something brush against my calf. A small parcel lay in the grass, wrapped in grocery bag plastic, tied with twine. No tag, no label. Inside was a cheap urn, lightweight, mass-produced, the kind you order online when you can't afford anything better. Inside that were cremains, human. No paperwork, no call, no record. Just a folded note inside the plastic. Please take care of her. I didn't go home that night. I logged the find like evidence, sealed, photographed, tagged, checked the missing paperwork list. Nothing. The next morning I called every funeral home within 30 miles. By the 3rd, I found a name that matched the description of a woman cremated 6 months earlier, unclaimed after payment issues. Her family had moved towns. They hadn't followed up. When I finally reached them, the voice on the other end trembled. The daughter said, "We couldn't pay the final release. We thought maybe they'd just keep her." "We did," I said, "and we will. No more charges." She cried quietly. I told her we'd give her mother a proper placement, paperwork and all. We waived the fee. The director approved it without hesitation. That night, I went back to the ossuary one last time before sealing the inspection log. The grass was dry. The air was still. The stainless steel reflected only what it was meant to, me, the moon, and nothing else. No woman, no shadow, no breath under the lid. Sometimes I think the reflection wasn't warning me. It was reminding me, some debts aren't about money, and shame is no reason to leave someone nameless. Rule 5. Nothing enters the ossuary or the ground without a name or a search. If an unknown arrives, treat it like evidence and a person. Shame is not an identity. Coyotes run the perimeter like they own the deeds. They don't bother the stones, don't dig, don't howl much. They just trot the fence line under the security lights, lean and silver gray, keeping their distance, but always watching. We leave each other alone, a kind of unspoken treaty between caretakers of different kinds. It was a hard winter night, cold enough that metal creaked like bones. The thermometer at the gate read 12 degrees, and even the wind had weight to it. I was doing the midnight inspection, the quiet walk through the veterans section where every row lines up perfect, flags frozen in salute, names chiseled in military order. That's when I saw him, a coyote, sitting still on the frost rim near the far corner, ears up, tail wrapped close. Not afraid, just alert. He wasn't looking at me, though. His gaze was fixed past my shoulder, locked on something I couldn't see. I turned my flashlight that way. Between two white stones stood a man. He was motionless, shoulders squared, hands clasped behind his back. Parade rest. His posture was military perfect. But what struck me first wasn't the stance. It was that he wasn't wearing a coat, just a uniform shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearm, standing steady in 12-degree air. "Sir?" I called softly, not wanting to startle him. "You can't be here right now." He didn't move. His breath didn't show. I took another step forward, light steady on his face. His jaw was clenched, eyes forward. There was discipline there, rigid, absolute, the kind that outlasts life. "Are you all right?" I asked. No response. He raised one hand, slow, deliberate, and touched the brim of a cap that wasn't there. The gesture was crisp, automatic, muscle memory. Behind me, the coyote let out a low whine, thin and sharp like a warning. That sound chilled me more than the cold. I took a step closer. My boot caught something small and stiff in the snow. I looked down, a miniature American flag, the kind we place for Veterans Day. The wood dowel had splintered at the base and frozen halfway into the ground. When my boot brushed it, it fell. The man's head turned toward me. Too fast. Unnatural. And for the briefest instant, the beam caught the side of his face where the right ear should have been. There was nothing, just smooth, featureless skin. The blank shape you see on unfinished plaster busts. The coyote barked, sharp and final. I flinched, turned toward the sound, and when I looked back, the man was gone. Just 2 stones and the empty space between. I stood there breathing clouds into the air that didn't feel like it was mine. Then I bent, picked up the fallen flag. The fabric was brittle, rimmed with frost. My glove came away with a flake of rot from the dowel, wood finally giving up after one too many seasons. I walked back to the truck, found a fresh flag from the maintenance box, and warmed the stick under my arm until the ice melted. When I returned, the coyote was still sitting there, head low, watching. I planted the new flag firm into the ground, centered, upright, respectful. The coyote stood, gave one slow blink, and trotted off into the dark. The wind eased, the air softened. Somewhere far down the hill, the generator kicked back to life with a steady hum. I lingered a minute longer, not because I was afraid, but because I felt seen, like someone who once knew duty had been standing inspection, making sure I remembered what mattered. Some tasks we do for the living. Some we do because something that remembers pain asked without words. And that night I understood the quiet rule every caretaker eventually learns out here. Rule 6. Attend to veterans' markers with ceremony. Replace flags before they fail. Respect holds the edge between memory and unrest. The night watch clock is a brass disc with numbered keys. Every hour, I fit the key for each checkpoint into its slot and turn it until it clicks, stamping proof that I've walked the grounds. The brass keeps time better than I ever could. It doesn't lie, doesn't skip, doesn't forget. For years, one of those checkpoints sat under the big cottonwood by the North Loop. You couldn't miss it. The tree was a landmark, wide trunk, silver bark, older than most of the graves. I used to stamp there without thinking, but not after the storm. The storm came in October, the dry kind, lightning without rain. A single bolt hit the cottonwood and split it clean down the middle, carving a black seam that still smells faintly of ozone when the air's right. The maintenance crew trimmed the worst of it and called it stable, but to me, the split looks like a mouth frozen mid-scream. A week after the strike, I went back on my usual route. The ground had crusted over with frost, and the leaves were stiff as parchment. I remember thinking it was too quiet. No wind, no rustle, not even the hum from the transformer by the fence. Just the tick of my boots and the faint swing of the clock on my belt. Then I heard it. A whisper. At first I thought it was the wind finally returning, the dry scrape of leaves shifting across asphalt. But it wasn't in the trees. It was around me, all over, like thousands of tiny tongues speaking in a language too old to have words. Every leaf on the ground seemed to be saying something, rubbing together though nothing moved them. I froze beneath the cottonwood's torn limbs. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't fear yet, just the sharp, wrong stillness that happens right before a charge builds. The air gets thick, the way it does before lightning. But this was winter. The sky was clean and cloudless. The sound swelled again, about 20 feet ahead, moving across the path in a long sweep, like something invisible dragging a hem through the leaves. It stopped where the trail bent toward the children's section. My hands went cold and useless. The whispering faded, and then the cheap solar lights that families set by the lambstones began to die, one after another. Pop, pop, pop. Their glow winked out in perfect sequence, a line of darkness moving through the graves like a wave of unseen hands blessing the ground. That's when the whisper turned into memory, me pinned under that same tree the night it split. Not by wood, but by the sound of 1,000 dry leaves talking at once, the storm raging without a single gust of wind. I'd crouched there, unable to move, while the charge climbed through the soil like something alive. I looked down then and realized how much metal I carried. Keys, belt buckle, phone, watch. I could feel the static crawling under my skin, raising every hair on my arms through my jacket. The air had that bittersweet smell of ionized oxygen, the smell right before lightning hits. I backed away, careful not to touch anything metal. The whisper followed, soft as breath. By the time I reached the perimeter gate, the hairs on my neck were standing straight up. I reached for the latch, and a blue spark jumped from my keyring to the steel post. Sharp, hot, bright. The pop echoed like a firecracker. The lights flickered once behind me, then steadied. The air went dead still. I took the checkpoint key and stamped my clock right there on the metal post outside the gate. The click sounded louder than it should have. Then I pulled a black marker from my pocket and wrote on the inside of the booth door where I'd see it every hour. When the air prickles and the small lights die, stop moving. It's still there, faded but legible, and I still skip the oak under the cottonwood every round. Some rules aren't about ghosts. Some are about remembering that nature keeps its own tally, and the dead aren't the only ones who can reach out when the air turns charged. Rule 7. When the air prickles and the small lights die, you're inside a charge. Avoid tall trees, metal, and open ground. Safety includes weather the dead can't feel. Sometimes the worst sound in a cemetery isn't crying. It's not bells or footsteps or the slow, careful tapping that sometimes seems to come from inside a wall. The worst sound is laughter, laughter that arrives without breath to carry it. The old receiving vault sits halfway up the west hill, a square of stone and rusted iron half swallowed by weeds. Long ago it held the dead through frozen winters when the ground was too hard to dig. Now it's sealed, cemented shut decades back. The hillside grew around it until only the door remains, like a mouth that forgot how to close. The teenagers call it Hell's Waiting Room. Every generation of them seems to find it again, daring each other to go touch the door, to prove they're not afraid. It was just past midnight when I heard the laughter. The sound rolled down the slope, light and bright, but wrong. Too high for the air that cold, too dry to have breath behind it. Then came the glow of phone screens bobbing in the dark, faces lit white-blue, each kid wearing that same mix of thrill and stupidity that comes before something breaks. I walked up slow, boots crunching frost. "Park's closed," I said, steady as a cop. Not angry, just firm. They spun around fast, light beams jerking. One of the boys held up a Ouija board like a hall pass, trying to joke. Another clutched a shovel. That's when my stomach turned. "Hand it over," I told him. He did, quick, too quick. The kind of quick that means he was more relieved to be stopped than scared to be caught. The group scattered down the path, laughter dissolving into whispers and footfalls. All but one. A girl stayed behind. She couldn't have been more than 6'10". She stood near the vault door, shaking, her breath fogging in soft bursts. "I didn't want to dig," she said, her voice small. "They dared me." I took the shovel from her, leaned it against the fence, and said, "You did right by stopping." She nodded, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. Her phone light trembled in her hand. I walked her all the way to the gate and waited until her car pulled away, her taillights shrinking down the county road until they looked like two faint stars swallowed by the dark. When I went back up the hill, the air felt heavier, like the ground itself was listening. I carried the shovel to the maintenance shed, intending to wipe it clean before logging it. But when I tilted the blade under the overhead light, I saw it. Fresh soil caught deep in the groove, wet and dark. They'd already started. I turned back toward the vault. The frost along the slope glittered faintly. Nothing moved. But as I passed the door again, my flashlight caught something on the hinge, a small piece of ribbon, torn and snagged in the rust. Pink, with tiny white daisies printed along it. It fluttered once in the still air, as if moved by breath that wasn't there. I reached out, then stopped. There was a feeling, not danger exactly, but a kind of warning, like stepping too close to the lip of a grave. I pulled the ribbon free with the end of my pen, careful not to touch it directly, and slipped it into an evidence envelope from my coat pocket. I've learned to keep those on me. Too many nights end with something you can't explain sitting in your palm. Later, I checked the area in daylight. The vault door was still sealed tight. The cement around the hinge had crumbled a little from frost, but nothing else was disturbed. No sign of digging, no footprints where they shouldn't be. Just the ribbon, and the feeling that something had watched the whole thing happen, waiting to see if someone would open what was never meant to be opened again. The ribbon is still in my desk drawer. Sometimes I look at it when I get the itch to test the boundaries of this place, to check the things we've sealed, to see if the silence behind the walls still holds. And every time, I remember the girl's face, and how close a dare can sit to a wound. The laughter hasn't come back. Maybe it moved on with them, or maybe the vault got what it wanted. Rule 8. No amateur rights, no prying at sealed structures, and no just looking. Interfere with the resting places, and the hill will take its tax, in flesh or in time. I heard singing before I saw the lights. Soft, 2 syllables, repeated over and over, like the kind of lullaby a mother hums when her throat is too tired for words. The snow that night came slantwise through the gate lamps, dry, glittering dust that whispered against the chain link. Out on the highway, the world moved slow and silent. The air was so cold, it made sound brittle, like it could shatter if you spoke too loud. I was there to open the main gates for the snowplow. We keep the roads clear for morning burials and the families who insist on coming no matter the weather. The plow driver was late, his headlights a dull glow behind the trees. I waited, keys in hand, breath white in the air. That's when the singing grew clearer. It wasn't behind me. It was along the outer fence, low voices sliding across the snow like a hymn too faint for memory. I squinted into the lamps, and shapes began to form. A procession. Dozens of silhouettes gliding past the fence line, shoulder to shoulder, each one holding something close to the chest. Flowers, maybe, or folded flags. I couldn't tell. They made no sound except for that slow, two-syllable song. No crunch of boots, no drag of cloth, no steam of breath. Just motion. Shadows cast through falling snow, as if someone was projecting film onto the storm. I wanted to call out, but the sound locked in my throat. My fingers went numb around the gate latch. The plow's chain stuttered somewhere behind me. Metal on asphalt. That rough rhythm you feel in your teeth. The driver leaned out his window and yelled, "You good?" I nodded, but I wasn't. I couldn't make my mouth move. I waved him forward and stepped into the lane to guide him around a drift. My flashlight beam bounced off the snowflakes like sparks. That's when I saw another set of headlights crest the hill. A civilian car, coming too fast for the ice. Its beams smeared across the white road like liquid gold. It fishtailed once, twice. I threw my arms wide and waved the glowing wand on my vest, yelling even though I couldn't hear my own voice. The car wobbled, caught, and straightened, sliding past the open gate by maybe 6 inches before vanishing down the hill in a spray of ice. The air smelled of burnt rubber and fear. I turned back toward the fence, half expecting the silhouettes to be scattered by the commotion. But there was nothing. The procession was gone. The snow still fell, untouched, unbroken. I forced my hands to work, pulled the flare box from the post, struck 2, one after another, their red flames spitting against the cold. I planted them along the shoulder, then waved the plow through. The heat from the flares melted crescent holes in the snow, steam rising like small ghosts. The driver rolled by slow cab lights washing me in yellow. He gave a short wave. I nodded, still trying to breathe normal. When the engine noise faded, the cemetery went quiet again. Too quiet. Somewhere near the veterans section, the wind carried 2 syllables, just once, and let them die. I walked back to the gate, locked it open for the next pass, and stood there a long time, staring at the flares burning down to stubs. My vest's reflective tape caught their light in little red pulses, like a heartbeat. That night, when I clocked out, I left the vest draped over the gate latch, bright orange against black iron. It's still there. I started keeping a box of flares beside every machine that rolls after dark, because I learned something that night. The dead might cross your path without ever touching you, but the living, if they can't see you, they'll hit you without meaning to. Rule 9. Anytime a vehicle enters at night, plow, hearse, or lost civilian, open the gate wide, put on high vis, set flares on the road, and become seen. The dead won't hit you. The living might. You learn the night in layers out here. The first layer is easy. Wind, gravel, your own footsteps. Then the smaller ones appear. The scold of an owl. The quick laugh of a fox. The soft push of paws on wet grass that means a cat's patrolling what it owns. After a few seasons, you start to tell them apart without thinking. A dog strays. A cat stays. An owl warns. A fox teases. The cemetery becomes a living map of sounds. But I'd never learned the sound a mountain lion makes. Not until the evening the sprinklers misted gold over the graves at closing time. I was locking up, watching the light fade from copper to gray, when I heard it. A low, steady growl rolling out from the hill behind the columbarium. It was the kind of sound that doesn't belong to the throat of anything small. Deep, rhythmic, steady. Like a motorcycle idling without a motorcycle. Every instinct in me went still. The sound pulsed once more, then stopped. The water hissed through the sprinkler heads, turning the air into sheets of fine mist. Every droplet caught the last sunlight and turned it to gold. Beautiful. ordinary, except for the tail. I saw it flick first, long, tan, smooth as silk, sliding through the scrub oak where the fence meets the hill. I stopped breathing on purpose so I could hear better. The air smelled wet and electric. Then she moved. A shadow peeled itself from the brush and curved into a crouch so fluid it erased every thought except the arrangement of my ribs. She was larger than I imagined a mountain lion could be, her shoulders rolling under fur like ropes shifting inside a bell. Her head was low, eyes fixed on me, not hunting, not panicked. Measuring. Every nerve in my legs screamed to run. But training, old and buried, rose up instead. Years ago, a park ranger had told me what to do if I ever met one. Don't run. Make yourself big. Keep your eyes on her. Let her know you see her. So I did. I raised my arms, spread my jacket, tried to sound calm, even as my heart pounded like it wanted out of me. "Hey, big girl," I said, voice trembling but steady enough. "I see you. I'm leaving." She shifted weight onto one paw, silent, deliberate. The sound of water hitting soil filled the space between us. Her tail swayed once, slow as a pendulum. I remembered the air horn clipped to my belt. It was meant for coyotes and teenagers, not apex predators, but it was something. I kept my eyes locked on hers, thumbed the button, and let it scream once, sharp and high, cutting through the mist. She blinked. Then, with a grace that felt older than the world, she stepped sideways, turned uphill, and melted into the brush. 3 bounds. No noise, no trail. Just gone. The sprinklers shut off in waves, 10 at a time, small sighs pulling air from the lines. The sudden quiet pressed down on everything. The only sound left was my own breath, jagged and human. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence settle. My fingers shook as I checked the horn. The button was still warm. When I finally moved, I stayed close to the fence, my eyes tracing the ridgeline where she'd vanished. The night felt wider, more alive. Not haunted, just honest. The kind of honesty that comes with claws and the understanding that you're not at the top of anything. The next day, I brought a second air horn and a flashlight powerful enough to turn pupils into mirrors. It's not fear that makes me carry them. It's respect. She and I share a boundary now, unspoken but firm. The hill belongs to her, the cemetery to me. Between us, the fence, and I intend to keep it that way. Rule 10. Treat big cats as neighbors with teeth. Don't run, look large, keep eye contact, back away, carry an air horn and a light that bites. Animal paths are theirs, not yours. Marble doesn't forgive gravity. It's one of the first lessons you learn in cemetery maintenance. Everything heavy wants to move downhill, no matter how long it's been standing still. There's an obelisk near the southwest corner we keep an eye on. A century-old spire, 13 feet tall, veined white marble with a crack running down its base like a thin grin. It leans just enough to notice, the way an old man favors one hip. Fine, until it isn't. That morning, I was chalk lining the perimeter for a straightening job. Frost still clung to the grass, and the light had that pale, early tone that makes every breath look like smoke. I set my tool bag beside the plinth, stretched my chalk reel, and began marking where the braces would go. That's when I heard it. A child's voice, close and plain, like someone standing behind me. "Don't go behind it." I froze. The reel stopped in my hand, chalk dust settling mid-air. I turned, expecting to see one of the groundskeeper's kids, maybe someone from the visiting family who'd wandered over, but the lot was empty. The road, too. Nothing but stone, grass, and the creak of a distant crow somewhere over the sycamores. I shook it off. Sound travels strangely among monuments. Sometimes it's just wind and geometry conspiring to make you jump. Still, the voice felt placed, as if the air itself had spoken it with purpose. I turned back to the obelisk. The lean was worse than I remembered. A half-inch more on the downhill side, maybe. Enough that the top shadow didn't line up with the foundation anymore. Up close, it looked uneasy, like something holding its breath. The plinth had sunk where the soil softened after winter rains. And now the whole column tilted south, waiting for permission to fall. I stepped around the front to measure, never behind, and that's when the wind changed. It came slow at first, just a lazy push through the trees, then gathered strength, steady, directional, the kind of gust that feels intentional. My chalk line snapped against the stone. The obelisk creaked once, a tick like a joint stretching too far. That sound lives in my bones now. It's the sound of stone remembering what it is. I dropped the tape and put both hands flat against the marble, not to catch it. You don't catch 1,000 pounds of anything, but to feel what it was doing. The vibration under my palms wasn't panic. It was old force rediscovering itself. Okay, I told it quietly. Okay. I eased back, heart hammering, and called the day crew leader on the radio. My voice came out steadier than I felt. When they arrived, we worked like surgeons, 3 of us circling the stone, speaking little, moving slower than gravity itself. We looped nylon straps around the midsection, triangulated the anchor points to the truck winch, and cribbed the base with pressure blocks. Every movement deliberate, practiced, respectful. Marble doesn't tolerate ego. It demands cooperation. The straps tightened, the lean settled, and the 1,000-pound argument between time and weight finally paused. Not ended, just postponed, turned from a threat back into a plan. Afterward, I stood a while, gloves white with chalk, staring at the face of the obelisk. Its engraving had worn almost smooth, the names unreadable, but the dates still legible. Husband and wife. He died in 1894, she in 1912. And I thought about that voice again, that small boy's voice warning me not to go behind it. Maybe he was theirs. Maybe just a memory caught in the stone. But I've been in this work long enough to know marble keeps its arguments. Between husband and wife, between balance and fall, between the living who move things and the dead who prefer to stay put. I never walk behind that obelisk anymore. I teach new staff the same rule, and when they laugh, I don't correct them. Gravity doesn't need your belief to win. Rule 11, never step behind a leaning monument. Never push from the downhill side. Never trust a quiet base. Strap, crib, and respect the physics before you lay a hand on stone. He came at closing, red-eyed, loud, and carrying the kind of exhaustion that smells like whiskey and sleeplessness. I saw him before I heard him, a silhouette swaying under the gate light, hands clenched at his sides. "Open it," he said, voice raw as gravel. He wasn't looking at me. He was pointing past me, toward the new grave we'd filled that morning. The earth was still mounded, snow-dusted, perfect in its symmetry. "She's not in there," he said again. "I know she's not." There's a tone you hear sometimes in this line of work. One part denial, one part certainty. The sound of love trying to claw its way out of time. I kept my hands visible, my voice low and steady. "We can talk in the office," I told him. He shook his head hard. I saw her move. You put the wrong woman in there." He stepped closer, close enough that the night air between us smelled of sour liquor and old grief. When he tried to shoulder past me, my body reacted before my mind caught up. Thousands of funerals had trained it to move quietly, firmly, like a door someone doesn't see until they hit it. "Office," I said again. "Please." He stopped, breathing hard through his nose. For a second I thought he might swing, but something in the tone, maybe the "please," got through. I walked beside him, not behind, keeping the distance of a conversation that might still go bad. Inside the office, the fluorescent light was too bright, the kind that shows every tremor in your hands. He paced, knocked a clipboard off the counter. Then he folded in on himself and started to cry. Not the quiet kind, the kind that shakes a body. I brewed coffee I didn't want, and set it in front of him. He didn't touch it, just pressed both palms over his face, sobbing like a boy who'd been told to be tough his whole life and finally couldn't. It took 30 minutes to walk him back from the cliff edge inside his head. I let him talk. About the accident. About how she'd hated the cemetery. Said it made her cold just to think about it. About how he'd gone to the funeral home and sworn he saw her eyes flutter when they closed the lid. Grief does that. It rewrites what you saw into what you need to see. When his words started to slow, I took his phone and found a contact labeled Brother. I called. A man answered, weary but calm. I told him where we were. 10 minutes later, headlights rolled up the drive, and the brother came in quiet and grateful. They left together, arms locked like men who hadn't done that since they were kids. When the door closed, I realized my legs had gone numb. My whole body was shaking. Out at the grave, the soil still looked perfect. Square corners, clean lines, untouched. Just the hum of the lights over the lane and the sigh of the cold earth settling around what it holds. I walked back to the office, poured both cups of coffee into the sink, and filled out an incident report that felt more like a confession. The dead don't start fights. The living do. And the living are armed with love. The kind that can break every rule without even knowing it. The next morning, I installed a night bell at the gate. A small red light that blinks when someone's there. A camera, too, not for the dead, but for the ones who can't let go. And I started wearing a body-worn recorder. Not because I don't trust myself, but because fatigue makes cowards of even the steady. When fear mixes with compassion, it's easy to forget what you said or how close you stood. Paperwork keeps one kind of peace. A good lock and a slow voice keep another. Rule 12. Don't argue with grief at a grave. Move it to light, call backup, document everything, and keep the grounds locked after hours. De-escalation is maintenance work,